Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and I have a fun quilt block that takes 2 fat quarters. So for every 2 fat quarters, we get one very large 21-inch block, which means whatever we're making, it is going to cover a lot of surface quickly. The blocks are easy, they're big, they're bold, and we do the stitching before we do the cutting. And that's just going to save us some time. So for this project, we can use fat quarters. Matter of fact, fat quarters are going to be better for this project. And in this case, I have a nice bundle of fabric from Riley Blake, and the fabric line is called Make. And the fabric is really dedicated to people that are makers. We have all these fun different symbols that we can relate to. It comes with little cross stitches and sewing machines and scissors, sewing needles, stitches, all of these things in fun, beautiful rainbow colors. And we can also get them in a dark version. And that's why a fat quarter bundle is really fun for this project. For each block, you're going to need 2 fat quarters. I'm going to press the one, press the second, put a little bit of a spray starch between them, and press those 2 together. When we are looking at a fat quarter, we do have a long side and a short side because it is 1/4 of a yard. You are going to have a square approximately 22 inches by 18 or 19 inches. It'll all be determined by the quarter of that yard or the width of that yard. And we're going to want to work along that long side. Now we can cut them apart and sew them, or we can sew them all as one big flat unit. I'm going to want 2 rows that I'm going to be able to draw at 4 inches. And draw my first line. That line, I would normally trim that off. But since I'm not trimming, what I'm going to do is do my next line from this line 4 inches. So I'm going to do a 4-inch line. And these are cutting lines, so I can use a permanent marker. And I'm going to do another 4-inch line. So I have a 4-inch space running down that 22 inches of fabric. From here, I'm going to want to divide this piece in half. So my middle line is going to be 10.5 inches. So I'm just going to take that, I'm going to use that straight line and just draw a straight line. So I'm going to use the 45-inch angle on my ruler. I'm going to draw my one line and draw the second line. Now we could just cut these apart the way they are, but I like to sew with it all in one big piece. So I'm going to sew these pieces together. I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch down, a 1/4 inch down, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch on each side of these lines, just like I would a half square triangle. Now I'm going to cut apart on the same lines that I drew. So I have that scrap piece. I have a 4-inch strip with a seam, and that's now sewn together. Another 4-inch strip, and that is sewn together. And I have 2 big squares of fabric, whatever was left over. And you can even see those edges did not match up, and that's okay. I'm not worried about that. And I can cut those in half right on top of those lines. So now I have 4 half square triangles. Let's work on those strips. We're going to place them right sides together so we have the opposite. And just take those seams and have them nestled right together. Now we're going to cut these into 4-inch strips. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure this edge is straight. I will always line up a straight line on that seam allowance. 4 inches And then just slide this a little bit over and do another 4 inches. And you're going to be able to get 5 piles with just a little bit left over. Now take these to the machine and sew on one side. And what we're going to do is we're going to make some big 4 patches. We now have 5 7.5 inch 4 patches. With these half square triangles, we're going to turn them into quarter square triangles. And you can see that I have left on that extra. I'm not worried about it because I know they're going to be trimmed down. But I will be matching that center seam. Once again, I'm going to feel and make sure that those seams are right there in place. I need to draw a horizontal line from corner to corner. I'm going to use the center stitching as a guide and some of my points. So I'm going to put any line on that stitching line, and I'm going to draw a line from corner to corner, or from semi-corner to corner. As long as this is straight on your seam and you're close to those points, you're going to be fine. This is going to be a cutting line. Now I'm going to put 2 pins. 1 pin on the one side of that line, a little bit past that 1/4 inch, and it's going to pick up the seam allowance from the top and the seam allowance from underneath. And I'm going to do the same to the other side of that line. So I'm picking up both of those seam allowances. Now I'm going to be able to stitch on one side and stitch down the other. And I won't need to remove the pins because they won't be in the way. And before I cut this apart, I do want to set that seam, and I want to glue these edges. But what we want to do is glue these points together. We want to make sure that that has stayed nice and straight. And I'm going to put a little glue on both sides of that line and press it. And we're going to be able to do that to both sides. And that glue will be trimmed off when we trim up these blocks. So press that glue and that seam nice and flat. Now I'm going to be able to cut this apart. And I'm going to cut it apart right on that center line between those 2 rows of stitching. Now I can trim these down before I open them up. Now to trim this down to a 7.5 inch square, we can use any ruler at all, even a square ruler. We are going to want those numbers going down that side until we hit the 7.5 inch mark on each side. Nothing else on the ruler is going to matter. So I'm going to slide that ruler right down until that 7.5 inch mark is pointing to the stitching line. Ignore that seam allowance. We're focusing on the stitching line. So that 7.5 inch is pointing. It's saying here is my 7.5 inch mark. My point, I'm going to be able to slide until that point hits that seam. This area here might be off a little bit, and that's okay. We're looking at 7.5 inches, 7.5 inches, and that point right there in that center seam. We did glue this, so those points are not going to move. And now we can trim that off. And you can see where we do have that extra, we're going to be able to trim down, so we didn't have to worry about having those match exactly. So any of this is just going to be discarded. This would have been discarded by straightening up the blocks anyways, so I'm okay with that. I cut off that glue, but that glue held it together. So I have beautiful points in this corner, and the points are perfect because that ruler hit those stitching lines. And once that's pressed, we're going to have a beautiful 7.5 inch square, which is going to match these 7.5 inch squares. So we will end up with 4 of these from our pieces. So I have 5 4 patches, and I'm going to put them in the corners and in the center. I do want the dark squares following and those light squares following. Then I'm going to be able to put in those quarter square triangles. I want the darker to fit inside. So I'm just going to make sure that they come pointing in. And there is that big, beautiful block. I have the one color running down the one side, and then I have the other color coming down on the other side, and it looks like this 4-patch is in between another square. So I can now take the rest of my fat quarter bundle, match it up together, and make more of these blocks. So I have made a total of 9 blocks. All of these colors have gone together just beautifully. So I have a great selection of all of these fun colors. I've made 9 blocks, so I did need 18 fat quarters. But this means I'm going to be able to put together a quilt 3 by 3. So I'll have a nice big square. You could put this together as a table runner, and we have options on how we're going to put them together. We can put them together so that we continue that light and dark theme, or we can turn that block. We can keep the darks together and keep the lights together. You can see how this would make a really quick, nice, big table runner. Now I'm going to put it together as a quilt, and I do want to keep lights and darks in each corner. That continues that dark line and also continues the light line. So it really is a fun block, and because it's nice, big 21-inch squares, it's going to go together quick and easy. When the blocks are all put together, it definitely is a fun pattern, but also I used fun fabric. I used these bright, fun colors. But if you choose a fabric that's softer, it is going to appear softer. When we look at how we did this, we drew those 2 lines, we stitched and cut them apart, and that made our 4 patches. On the bottom, we did those lines, we made half square triangles, and we turned those half square triangles into quarter square triangles, so there wasn't much left over. And we were able to draw on the fabric and then just trim it all at the same time. So it saves a little time, and it's fast to go on the machine when it's all one big piece of fabric. I do hope you give it a try. It's a fun project to use up our fat quarters. And remember, every 1 square takes 2 fat quarters. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I do have a newsletter. It's all free under Sew Very Easy. And be sure to make every day a Sewtacular day. Bye for now.